Okay, first of all, the reason for this interview in a nutshell is that AJ, you believe that you were Jesus, and Mary, you believe that you were Mary Magdalene. And you've both admitted to a lot of people that when hearing this, they would probably think you're just clearly deluded. So can you please explain how you arrived at this understanding?
Well, Jeff, firstly, we don't believe we were Mary Magdalene or Jesus, but we believe we are. And I suppose that is the beginning of the first set of circumstances we need to explain, and that is we believe that people have one life, not many lives, and so therefore when you're born first on earth, usually your parents name you, and in my case in the first century my parents named me Yeshua, and then you grow and certain things happen to you in your life. So in my life I grew and certain things happened in my earth-based life, and then I died, as many do. I didn't die the same way that a lot of people die, but I died, and then I passed into the spirit world and I was still the same person, and then I progressed through the spirit world, still as the same person, but just developing and growing just like any person does. And then we got to a point where both Mary and myself started recognising that we were one soul and not two separate individual souls. And that's something that we recognised before we passed from the earth in the first century. But and then Mary was born in the first century in the same manner, and she had a life in the first century, and she died, and then she arrived in the spirit world, and she continued to progress just the same, and we progressed together, recognising that we were a part of the same soul, which we call soul mates, I suppose, but the reality is we're one soul in two bodies, if you like. And then we recognised, after that development continued, that we had an opportunity to return to the planet. If we were willing to take on a different set of bodies, we had an opportunity to return to the planet. And so when we returned, it was just the same process, the same person, Jesus and Mary, splitting into the two separate bodies, if you like, again, and then developing on Earth again. But we're still the same person. It's all one life, and it has a memory of that entire life.
And you've always had this memory, even as a very young child in this life?
No, because you've got to understand how memories are created. For every single person who's ever lived, we are selective about our memories based on our emotional condition associated with the memory. So usually what you find happening on the earth today is that when memories are associated with trauma, then generally they're quite heavily suppressed. And sometimes when memories are associated with beautiful things that you've lost, you often suppress the memory of those things as well. And then in addition, our day-to-day life sometimes isn't very eventful, and so even yesterday I doubt many of us could actually recall in detail what actually happened to us yesterday, unless there were some significant events that we could recall. And so with regard to memory, what happens is there has to be some emotional allowance of the memory occurring.
So how old were you when this first occurred?
Well, for me, I had some memories occur when I was around 2 years of age in this life, but I didn't have an emotional allowance of what it meant. So I had memories of somebody driving nails through my feet, but I didn't have any emotional way of joining that together and realising what it was, given the brain of the 2-year-old is not probably capable of working out those particular things. And so that was the beginning of some of my memories. For Mary, I think hers were more around when she was 14 or 15.
Yeah, 14 or 15, I think. I had a specific event where I remembered being murdered, and I remembered also being on the run for my life, and it was quite a big emotional memory experience, and I also didn't have any context to put that in.
Did this come out as in your conscious mind or in a dream? Or?
No, I was at a workshop, sort of like a personal development workshop, and really spontaneously a piece of music was played, and I began to feel incredibly sad for no apparent reason, and I began to sob, and suddenly the details of these traumatic events were upon me, and I spoke about them with the group I was with, and they said, well, it's a past life memory, and it's okay, you just need to get on with things. And I didn't actually have a belief in reincarnation at the time, and so I didn't put much stock in that, and I just tried to get on with my day. We moved on to doing other activities, but for me, the grief just kept coming and coming and coming and coming for a good 6 hours. And beyond that, I just kind of folded in the I don't understand a category of my life. Until I met AJ, probably. Okay. Although not immediately after I met AJ, because when I met AJ, I was fairly skeptical, I think is probably the correct term. I resonated incredibly with what he was speaking about. In fact, it was bizarre because I felt almost as if I understood what he was talking about before he explained it. And we had many conversations in the beginning of our relationship where we'd be discussing an issue and I'd sort of be saying, oh yeah, and isn't all this obvious? Like, doesn't everyone see this? And he would point out, and there was a lot of evidence for the fact that not everyone does believe or see this. So when I met AJ, I was really attracted to what he was talking about, but I wished he'd stopped telling people he was Jesus, because I felt that really damaged the impact, the believability, if you like, and how open people were to responding to it.
You really had the approach, didn't you, that if you could convince me that I wasn't Jesus, then everything would be fine. Then.
Yeah, it was a fairly arrogant approach, actually. It didn't really put a lot of stock in how much you'd actually gone through to get to a point to be able to say it to people. Yeah.
So AJ, how did your mother react when you came out, so to speak?
Yeah, probably would have been sort of 4 or 5 months after I. What happened? Obviously, I had a series. So now we're jumping ahead nearly from 2 years of age to 38, or to nearly 40 years of age. So now there's a fair bit of life in that little gap, where a lot of different things occurred, that were memories again that I couldn't accept and I couldn't explain. And so what I did was very similar to what Mary did when she was 15, and that is just slot it in the background and say, well, I don't know anything about that. I didn't believe in reincarnation the way it was portrayed by people on the planet today. And I felt quite strongly that the teaching of reincarnation had a lot of unloving bases to it, therefore could not be truth. And so I just slotted, like Mary did, a lot of the events in the background and just sort of left it for another day to resolve, basically. And it wasn't until I was around nearly 40 that I started having a lot stronger memories and recollections of events throughout my life in the first century and in the spirit world and in this life, and I started to actually take them a bit more seriously and start documenting them and not in documenting them, but processing them through them emotionally, like accepting them emotionally, and after about sort of that process began in earnest around 2003, 2004, and after about 5 months of it, I was fairly convinced that I knew who I was. In fact, it wasn't the memories that convinced me. It was just, it wasn't like there was a necessary for conviction even. It was just, this is who I am, sort of a feeling. It's a bit like you coming to terms with the fact, let's say that you, and this was probably a poor example, but let's say that you had some kind of inheritance that you weren't aware of, and then someone came along and told you that actually, the parents that you have now, they were actually your foster parents, and your real parents were such and such, and those two parents would like to meet you and get to know you and so forth. You'd probably go through a fair bit of turmoil in that sort of transition where you sort of start doubting what your own experience to a degree, and you start working your way through who is my mum and dad and what's the reality and all those kind of things. But after a period of time of working your way through that emotionally, you'd come to terms with the fact that yes, you had these real parents, and there was proof and evidence to support that, but you were
So
adopted
what's
out.
made you certain beyond a doubt that these memories are correct? Because there's a lot of stuff in the media about repressed memories not being correct memories, and being, that our minds have the ability to fabricate things from different experiences, and
Totally, I agree with that.
and that our memories can't really be relied upon. What has given you the certainty?
The real memory is not the memory of the events, but rather the memory of who I am. It's a bit like somebody coming along and telling you, Jeff, that you're somebody else. No matter how much they try to brainwash you into believing you're somebody else, at some point in time in the future you'd probably come to terms with what life you've actually had and who you actually are as a result of that particular life you've led. And that's really what's happened for myself. There's nothing unique about the process. It's just that I've just remembered a lot of my life now that I didn't remember before because of different emotional reasons that I had to suppress it. And when I was no longer willing to suppress those particular memories, they just rose quite naturally. And as a result of that, now I remember almost all of my life for the last 2,000 years. And there's still gaps in it that are due to further suppression that I have of some particular memories that I'm aware of. But I can tell you, it would take quite a few weeks to give you a bit of a summary of my life over that period of time, obviously. But I could give you a pretty concise summary of all the things that occurred in my life over that period.
Yeah, and it conflicts in some ways with the biblical account, doesn't it?
Of course. I even have memories of watching the biblical account being modified to suit the people who modified it, in terms of to suit power and manipulation of people and so forth. So not only do I have the memories of my life, but also the memories of watching people modify the account of my life to suit their own ends.
So you've got memories of the spirit world as well.
Yeah, and what we did in the spirit world and so forth.
And
how I arrived, and what I did after I arrived, and what I did when while Mary was still on earth, because I passed before Mary did, and what we did until our children passed, our child passed, and then what we did after that.
So
well.
when you were in the first century, you had a daughter. Is that correct?
Yeah, she wasn't born when I died.
No,
Mary
you
was
said
pregnant. Yeah.
At 6 months pregnant.
Yeah, and Mary gave birth to her after I passed. Yeah.
And you have a memory of watching this from the spirit world.
Yeah.
All take place.
Yeah. Yeah. Mary was in Egypt at the time, and gave birth to Sarah in Egypt. Yeah.
In this life, you've been a computer. You've run a successful computer company.
Yeah.
For about 20 years, you said.
Yeah. I also window cleaned and did other things too.
Yeah. And Mary, you were an occupational therapist.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you said that it took you till about the age of 30 to be at one with God in your first incarnation.
Yes.
When and you say that you're a work in progress at the moment.
Yes.
When do you believe that time is going to come?
Well, in the first century, what happened was that I was about 18 years of age when I started to contemplate that I was possibly the Messiah that was foretold in the Bible that in the parts of the Bible that I'd read at the time. It wasn't called the Bible then, obviously. It was the books of the prophets that we used to read as Jews. And after reading my way through those and having a deep interest in those for many years of my life in the first century, by the time I was 18, I started to contemplate that perhaps I might be that particular Messiah that was spoken of. And by the time I was 21, I was quite certain that I was that person, but I realised that I had to do quite a lot of development in love to become that person. And so it took me around, if you take from 18 to 31 years of age, was when I became at one with God in the first century. So it took me 13 years, if you like, for me to become at one with God in the first century, after having a concept of what that meant inside of myself.
And you claim that you were the first human being to have ever done that.
Yes, the first person in this planet to have ever done that, yes. I do feel that there are persons on other planets who have done that, and there was always a first. It's a bit like there's a first person to discover flight, and there's a first person to discover all sorts of scientific endeavours, if you like.
And so you can see yourself working towards this same state in this life.
Yes. So it was only about 8 years ago that I recognised and had the memories of who I was returned to me, and also then recognised within myself the desire to become at one with God again in that same kind of condition. And so for the last 8 years I've been working towards that goal. And if it takes me another 8 years, I wouldn't be disappointed. You know what I mean? Like, now,
when you were in this state in the 1st century, you had a reputation of being a healer and a miracle worker. Is this true?
Well, parts of it were true. There were certain things that it was claimed that I did that I didn't actually do, but there were certain things that I certainly did do. But that only occurred after I became at one with God, and it was dependent upon God. It wasn't something that I could do at my own at my own choice, if you like. Because my choices were in harmony with God's. When you become at one with God, your choices are in harmony with God's. It meant that my choice was the same as God's choice, and under those circumstances, I could heal if the person who was being healed also had a desire to be healed. So if they didn't have a desire to be healed, and it had to be a true desire that they felt in their heart, not just an intellectual desire, then I couldn't heal them anyway.
If you contrast it, I mean, it's possible for you to heal me right now. There just has to be a certain set of conditions, and that is that you are in harmony with God's desire for that healing to happen, and that I am in a place of openness and faith for that to happen. Now, because at the time AJ was completely in harmony with God's desires, when he healed someone, he could always heal them. But
I didn't heal everyone I met, because it depended upon their condition, their desire.
So even crippled, blind, those stories in the Bible?
All those stories involving cripples and blind people and other physical ailments, including loss of limbs, and all of those stories are all true. But all the stories involving what I would call supernatural feats were not true.
No.
So, for example, the claim that I turned water into wine, for example, is not true.
And the walking on the water, you didn't go skiing that day?
No, I didn't walk on water, although I do believe...
Did you find fish over the other side of the boat in more
Yes, but that's quite
quantity?
Simple. Because all you have to do is have the psychic ability to have a spirit tell you that this is where the fish are.
You didn't calm the waters? Or did you calm the disciples?
Well, both, probably. The reality is you can calm your environment through your emotions. So the reality is that one reason why the Earth is experiencing a lot of quite difficult environmental events is because of the fear of the people on the Earth. And if you reduce the fear of people on the Earth, then the environment responds differently to the soul of the people on the Earth. So the reality is if you calm the individual at a soul level, then the environment around them also calms, and that's something that God created as a part of the truth of the environment we live in. And that can be demonstrated scientifically, and that's one of the things I'd certainly hope to demonstrate in the future scientifically. So there are some truths that are presented in the scriptures about what I did, and then there are some falsifications that tried to make me more powerful than I was in order to compare me with other people who had likewise been lied about what they did, in order to make it more palatable for different people to become Christian. But also there was this concept that many people couldn't understand the degree of love that I displayed, and so then began treating me as if I was some divine individual, or God, rather than just a person who was at one with God, or who had learnt from God. And so that was part of the problem. It was the misconception of people as well of what it meant to be at one with God.
Yeah.
So in the future,
I just wanted to say that this is really integral to why we're here and why we are here in the way that we are. why there's not just one of us, why there's in fact 14 of us, all coming from a condition of quite perceptible error in our lives prior to now, and even now. It's quite easy to see that we're not perfect individuals, perfected in love, but the purpose of doing so, and doing so now apparently increasingly more publicly, is to demonstrate that it's not because Jesus is God that he was so amazing, that this potential exists within every soul that God has created. And that's really a lot of people ask us about our identities, and a lot of people are fascinated or dubious or attacking even about this process of memory. And while I feel it's valid to ask all of those questions, I also feel that there are other questions that I hope become more prevalent in people that follow on from there about why is this so, and why would you do this, and because that's really the basis of why we're here. And I understand that it's shocking and people need to ask about, or people want to ask about these things, but I look forward to the day when people ask more about God and about love, because that's certainly what we're passionate about.
Yeah, the reality for both of us is that the Jesus and Mary Magdalene thing is not that we feel is not that important to anybody else but ourselves.
So your message is the more important thing.
Of course, it's like your identity is really important to yourself. Like you are who you are.
Well, I guess it's important for this interview.
Yeah.
In that there is much scepticism about obviously what you claim, and you expect that.
Of course.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to address that scepticism.
Yeah. Can I point out though that when I met you, you came up to me and said that you were Jeff, and I didn't have scepticism about your claim.
No. No.
So the main purpose of the scepticism is because of my claim that I'm Jesus. It's not.
Yeah.
Like if I was saying that I was just Alan John Miller, and I'm claiming I'm Alan John Miller, everyone's fine with that. But as soon as I claim that I'm Jesus, that's when everybody becomes sceptical.
And to some degree.
Well, I guess because a lot of people regard Jesus, the historical Jesus, as being probably the most influential character of the last 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And when someone comes along and says, "Hey, I'm him," you know, I guess we have the right to say, "Well, I need a little bit of proof here," you know.
I wouldn't say that. I don't know about the right. I feel it's natural to desire to discern whether it's truth or not.
And we're perfectly happy to answer any questions associated with it. But if a person demands of us the right, then I feel that they're a bit out of line, really.
No, that's right.
The reality is that it will soon become apparent whether what we're claiming to be is true or not. You know, so if somebody comes and visits us in 10 years' time and we haven't progressed beyond what we are today, and we haven't done anything more than what we have done today, then I'm sure people would be very sceptical. The other problem that people have, I feel, when it comes to the claim of being Jesus is that they remember the Jesus who was 31 years old onwards. In other words, they know nothing of me before that time. The only other record of me in the Bible is when I was 12 years old, and even that was incorrect. So, there's my birth, and the few months after my birth that's recorded. Then there's a gap of 12 years, and then I'm 12, and there's one event that was recorded, and then there's a gap of 18 years, and then there's another event, a series of events recorded. And people don't contemplate very much what happened in those gapped years, what were the events of Jesus' life in the times in between. And what I'm demonstrating to people now is, what I'm doing now is what happened in between. This is the process of becoming at one with God. This is what it involved for me in the first century, and this is what it's going to involve for anybody who wishes to become at one with God. And I can remember the gaps in between if anybody's interested to hear, but what do you have to verify it with? Nothing. And so in the end of the day, you can ask me questions about my life, and in particular questions about my life in all of those gapped years, but what proof do you have that even what I'm saying about that is even true? There's none, really. And until such a time as the so-called physical evidence or the miraculous evidence appears, which only appeared in the first century after I became one with God, until such a time, there's probably going to be lots of disbelief about my claim, and I can't see whether that how that cannot be the case.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, I don't want to take over your interview, Jeff, but
Right.
I feel that for myself personally, and I think for AJ also, we really have absolutely no expectation that people believe us on these claims, and
No, you don't seem to care.
not at all. And in fact, most, I would say, the majority of people in our life really haven't resolved the issue for themselves.
Definitely haven't.
And yeah, it's not a much as the media portrayed. I think somebody counted the amount of times were shown AJ writing on the board, "I'm Jesus, deal with it," and which was shown quite out of context. And out of context, it does seem like the main thrust of what we're saying is, "I'm Jesus and I'm here and you've got to deal with it," which is actually not the truth. And
Which was a culmination of 3 years of presentations, 52 presentations a year. So after nearly 200 presentations, people were still coming up and asking me identical questions they were asking me 3 years earlier about the Jesus issue.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, well, look, I'm saying I'm Jesus. You've got to have to deal with that sooner or later. And let's get on to some other subject that matters, you know.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get on to another subject that matters.
Sure.